Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. And today's episode is Hannibal Season 3, Episode 3, Secondo. Episode in a nutshell is a brief reminder of what happens in the episode. So the episode begins with Will and Hannibal sitting across from each other in his office furniture in the middle of the woods, basically having a little bit of an internal therapy session. We then see basically glass shattering and hear some shots fired as Will is in the woods, and he continues to hike, where we then see him use binoculars to see Chio hunting. We then follow Chio to prepare her kill, and then we see Hannibal, who is also preparing his meal for dinner with Bedelia and the Professor Sogliotto, who has been rude to him basically since they met, and he very casually puts an ice pick into Sogliotto's head, which he does survive, and is kind of laughing in disbelief, which disturbs Bedelia, who's also at the dinner, so she then decides to go over and pull out the ice pick, which is what kills Sogliotto, which Hannibal is quick to point out that in this case it's Bedelia who is responsible for killing him. Bedelia then comments on how, that's two murders in the same place, and she realizes that he's actually trying to draw the attention of everyone he's left behind to him, so Jack, Will, etc. We then see Jack arriving at the church, and he then is approached by Ronaldo, who I guess hopes he'll have better luck with Jack than he did with Will, and talks about Il Monstro and his youth trying to find Hannibal. We then follow Will still in the woods and kind of watching Chio going about her life, and he ends up following her. And when he follows her into a building, he then finds that there is a man in the cage, and Chio confronts him at gunpoint, basically saying, "You're trespassing." He claims to be Hannibal's friend, and she asks if he sent him, and ultimately Will inquires about who is in the cage, and Chio basically reveals that the man in the cage is one who ate Misha, and that is when, a still suspicious Chio is told by Will that the last time he saw Hannibal, he was left with a smile, and he shows off his belly scar, and she asks him to tell him a story, as all sorrows can be born if they are put into a story. We then move on to Hannibal, who is hosting yet another dinner with a couple, though this time he does not kill them. And then we have Chio back with Will, and we're getting the tail end. Presumably, Will has told the story of him and Hannibal, and he then asks her where Hannibal can be found, and she wants to know why he would want to find Hannibal when the last time he saw him, he left him with a smile. And Will tells her that he's never known himself as well as he's known himself when he is with Hannibal. And this is when Chio reveals that Hannibal originally wanted to kill the man in the cage, but Chio wouldn't let him, so Hannibal left the man's life in her hands, and that is why she has been there ever since. Kind of an exchange of stories. And then Bedelia and Hannibal are having like a small moment, and she asks him about his first spring lamb, which of course would have been unintentionally Misha, before we then return back to Will freeing the man from the cage, driving him out into the woods and saying, like, "Go away. I've freed you, you have your chance, run, leave," so on and so forth. And then he leaves, before we then once again return back to Jack and Ronaldo talking, and this time they're talking more about Will, And Jack points out that Will is someone who is able to understand and accept Hannibal. And isn't that what everybody wants, to be fully seen and understood and accepted? And then, he and Ronaldo talk about Will and Hannibal before we then once again return to Chio, who brings food to the man in the cage who remains unnamed throughout the episode and is attacked by the man whose cage is left open and who went back after Will freed him. And of course, when he attacks her, she's forced to defend herself and ends up stabbing him with a chicken bone. And he is killed. She then screams. Will outside hears the scream, comes back, and basically is kind of accused of doing the things Hannibal does. She says that Will told her Hannibal had left her with the man to see if she would kill him because he was curious, and that Will was curious too. She also then says that Hannibal would be proud of him before agreeing to help him find Hannibal, as she no longer has a reason to stay now that the man is dead. So Will then decides to make the man into a moth before they head out together, him and Chio. And then we, for the final scene, return back to Bedelia and Hannibal talking about Will and Misha and love and how there is only one way she foresees Hannibal being able to forgive Will. And Hannibal, who is playing an instrument at the time, basically looks up straight into the camera and says he has to eat him. So now that we have been reminded about what happened in the episode, we'll now rank the episode. As always, we'll be ranking on the mostly objective ranking list, followed by the personal ranking list. So for this episode, we of course have the multi-episode supporting character introduction in the form of Chio, who is Hannibal's childhood friend and servant to his aunt, who had been left at the castle to take care of the man who ate Misha because she didn't want Hannibal to kill him, but who ends up having to kill him in self-defense because of Will. Worth 2 points. Then we have our multi-season supporting character development, which is the reveal that Jack also survived the glass shard to his neck, and he has also come to Italy hunting Hannibal and maybe even a little bit Will. Then we have, and that was worth 3 points, and then we have our impactful moment or memorable moment, line, etc. And to me, this is, of course, the one time Will was able to beautifully decorate a corpse. That sounds worse than it is. But, like the imagery in this show is really amazing. I've said that since episode 1. Like, the imagery really is good in the show. And Hannibal has a bunch of aesthetic murders under his belt. But Will, when we look back, he has skin stretched over animal bones in a museum. Very ugly. We have a burning rolling chair, which was like not even who it was supposed to be. Unrecognizable, not very good. And then we have this Mothman who is very well designed. It looks really cool. It is very aesthetically decorated. Is it? Yeah. There's no other way to say it but decorated corpse because he literally has like little mushrooms and stuff like hanging off the body to form like the body of the moth. He has like these pretty shards of glass to make up the wings. Like it's very nicely decorated and it looks like a moth and it's very memorable and it's Will's, I think, as far as I can recall, only really aesthetic body that he drops. So I think it's worth the 3 points, which brings us to 8 points total. However, we do have one negative I felt for this episode, and that was, to me, the weak subplot concept, worth minus 2 points, bringing us to 6 out of 10. And for me, that's the man in the cage fiasco. So how do I want to word it? I get why the man in the cage is there. The purpose of that is, of course, to reveal what happened to Misha, as not everybody will have read the books or watched the other movies to know kind of more of the backstory. So the show had to tell us somehow what happened to Misha. And we know that Hannibal in the past has mentioned Misha, mentioned she was dead, mentioned the impact her death had on him, but he's never actually said how it was she died or what happened to her. So by introducing the man in the cage, it does give us an opportunity to see Will finding out that information in a believable or realistic way by finding this man in the cage who was one who was supposed to have eaten Misha. Therefore, we find out that she was eaten. And then through Bedelia and Hannibal's conversation, we find out that Hannibal also had to eat her, though he didn't kill her. So I understand the plot purpose of this man in the cage. However, I also think that Will showed a lot of audacity and was a bit presumptuous in the whole freeing him and then decorating him and making Chio kill him. And like I said, like I feel like they could have done it differently. I mean, they could have had a conversation with, like they've brought up Misha to Will before in their therapy sessions. They could have told us the backstory then. There's the conversation between Hannibal and Bedelia. They could have let the audience in with that. And as far as I'm aware, Chio in the original books didn't even have this large of a role, so they really also didn't need to like have that necessarily. Like Will could have gone to an abandoned castle, found some sort of hint or document or something, and gone found him back in Italy again or something. But at the same time, like I understand why they've gone this route. I just personally felt like the whole subplot didn't really land for me personally. And while I always say the mostly objective ranked values are void of motion, bias and judgment do still apply. And my bias and judgment on this subplot is that it was weak. So, minus 2 points. And again, that brings us to a 6 out of 10 for this episode. So that brings our season 3 ranking so far at our mostly objective ranking to in first, Primavera, second, Antipasto, and this episode is third, Secondo. So as for my personal ranking on this episode, as I mentioned in the mostly objective ranking, I thought Will's audacity to involve himself in a situation that had nothing to do with him just because he has a, at this point, tenuous connection to Hannibal was very presumptuous of him. I didn't like it. I mean, we have Hannibal, who it's a personal criminal, probably the most personal, the one who may have killed and eaten his sister. I mean, we know from the movie Hannibal Rising that there was a whole group of them, but this one supposedly is one who actually killed her so that they ate her in the stew. Honorable mention to the movie Hannibal Rising, by the way. Love that movie. I don't do movies on this channel, at least not right now, as far as rewatching and ranking, but would definitely recommend watching Hannibal Rising. I've watched it several times. Love that movie. Silence of the Lambs, however, I could never get over the tongue thing. It was so outside of my character ideal for Hannibal, who has always in every other version of his story been not rude and very put together, and that tongue thing was both rude and disturbing and very out of character to how I see Hannibal. So I've never watched Silence of the Lambs because that's the most famous scene from the movie, and it's just completely off-putting to the character and the franchise as a whole. So never seen Silence of the Lambs because I can't get over the tongue thing. But Hannibal Rising, really good movie, really good explanation or story of Hannibal's backstory, which we get to learn in this episode through the way the TV series has decided on it. And as mentioned, Man in the Cage is meant to be, the person who killed and ate/fed Hannibal's younger sister Misha to them, to Hannibal and eaten her himself. And so that's a very personal villain for Hannibal, his origin villain. And so, like I said, the audacity of Will to just insert himself into that narrative that literally has nothing to do with him there was a lot of presumptuousness, especially to then let him go. And then we also had Chio, whose personal connection was, of course, that, she was also affected by Misha's death, having been a close family friend and childhood friend of Hannibal, and understanding Hannibal and how that loss impacted him. And she was the one who stopped Hannibal from killing the man in the cage. Therefore, she took responsibility for that by then basically being held hostage at the place to look after him, to make sure that the man in the cage stayed alive. And again, that's between her, Hannibal, and the man in the cage. Will had nothing to do with it. And then just the presumption, the presumptuousness of him to then just insert himself, let the man go. Man goes back to the cage, then ends up dead. Chio now a murderer when she didn't want to be, although to be fair, self-defense. But still, she didn't want to kill somebody. Now she's killed somebody. I just think Will's behavior there I did not enjoy at all. It marked down quite a lot. However, I did like how I can't think of any other way to put it other than saying decorated the corpse of the man in the cage to look like a moth. We've seen a lot of like really aesthetic murder art pieces by Hannibal throughout the series so far, but Will, we haven't really seen that. I mean, his personal murders that he's done, one in self-defense, he like put the skin over the skeleton in the museum, very ugly. Then, there was the burning wheelchair and he didn't even kill Freddie Lounds, so like that one was really didn't count, but even so, not aesthetic. This is the first time that we've actually seen Will like take the time and effort to, and again, I can't think of another way to put it, but decorate the corpse. He put like little mushroom and vines out of the body to kind of make like the moth shape for the lower body. Then he, of course, put in like the wings, which have like all the little shards of like glass materials and colors and such. And it's like, it's really aesthetically awesome. He, strung him up so that he's hanging there. Like, it was very aesthetic. And I enjoyed the imagery of it. I thought it was well done. Though, again, the audacity of Will to just like insert himself into that narrative when he had no connection to it. But beyond that, I also think that best way to end the episode, that amazing line from Hannibal, I have to eat him while he's looking straight at the camera, is amazing. Favorite ending of an episode, I think, of any of them. However, also the atmosphere. I love the forest as a setting in any work of fiction. Deserts are my least favorite because hot, sweaty, burning sun, I can't even imagine how uncomfortable and awful it would be. So I hate desert settings the most. Probably jungles, again, hot, sweaty, like anything that's tropical or hot, I hate the thought or idea of. But like beautiful, like cool forests or like snow and mountains and all of that, love those settings, love the atmospheres that they create. And I think the atmosphere around Hannibal's castle, which also awesome that he has a castle. I think that's great. Is very, very appealing. I loved the atmosphere, loved the setting. But again, Will's behavior, really big sticking point for me, which is why, even though there was quite a bit good about the episode as well, I just couldn't get fully past it, and that is why it is a 4 out of 10 for me. Which then brings our personal ranking so far to in first, Primavera, second, Secondo, and then in third, we have Antipasto. And that now brings us to the series ranking so far. And on our mostly objective ranking, we, of course, have Season 2 in first with 86.92%, Season 1, sorry, in second with 83.85%, and Season 3 so far has a score of 22 out of 130. While on our personal ranking side, we of course have Season 2 in first with the highest score so far, which was 88.46%. Season 1, lowest score so far with 66.92%. And Season 3 is so far only at 12 out of 130. But with that, we have now rewatched and ranked Hannibal Season 3, Episode 3, Secondo. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.